Have you ever noticed that the very moment you stand at the edge of extraordinary achievement, something within you creates an invisible barrier that no amount of knowledge, skill, or opportunity seems able to overcome? My research spanning over 2 decades, studying more than 500 of America's most successful individuals, has revealed a startling truth. The primary obstacle to your success is not external competition, economic conditions, or lack of opportunities, an internal adversary that I call disguised fear. What would your life look like if you could identify and eliminate this hidden saboteur that has been quietly derailing your most important endeavors? The statistics are alarming. 86% of individuals with genuine talent and ambition never reach their full potential because they remain blind to how fear operates within their own minds. This invisible enemy doesn't announce itself with trembling hands or racing hearts. No, this sophisticated adversary cloaks itself in rational-sounding excuses, procrastination, perfectionism, and what I've come to call comfortable dissatisfaction. The most dangerous aspect of this disguised fear is that it operates beneath your conscious awareness. It whispers seemingly logical reasons to delay action, convinces you that someday is a viable strategy, and creates elaborate justifications that feel entirely reasonable until decades have passed with your greatest gifts still unexpressed. In this transformational message, I'm going to reveal precisely how this fear has been operating in your life, often for years or even decades, and provide you with the exact methodology to not only recognize it but permanently dismantle its influence. This is knowledge that has transformed the lives of countless individuals who once stood exactly where you stand now, capable, intelligent, and wondering why their dedication hasn't yet produced the results they know they deserve. What separates those who achieve magnificent success from those who merely dream about it isn't superior intelligence, privileged backgrounds, or extraordinary luck. Through my extensive interviews with men and women who built empires from nothing, including Andrew Carnegie, Thomas Edison, and Henry Ford, I've identified the precise mental framework that allows certain individuals to push through the very same fears that paralyze others. Today, I will share with you the complete system for unmasking and destroying the specific fears that have been sabotaging your progress. You'll discover why traditional approaches to overcoming fear are fundamentally flawed, and why positive thinking alone often reinforces rather than removes these hidden barriers. The transformation awaiting you isn't merely about feeling better, it's about fundamentally altering how your mind processes fear itself, converting it from an obstacle into fuel for unprecedented achievement. What you're about to learn has helped ordinary individuals accomplish extraordinary feats, not by becoming fearless, but by developing a radically different relationship with fear itself. Before we continue, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, as what I'm about to share represents the culmination of my life's work understanding the architecture of achievement. This knowledge has created millionaires, transformed businesses, and brought profound success to those wise enough to apply it. Let us begin this journey together. Let me speak frankly about the true nature of the problem we're addressing. Fear, in its disguised forms, is not merely an occasional inconvenience, it is the primary reason why capable people live lives of quiet desperation. The tragedy is not that you experience fear. The tragedy is that you've been conditioned to misidentify it, allowing it to operate unchecked throughout your life. Consider this. When Thomas Edison faced his 1000th failed attempt at creating the electric light bulb, his assistants were ready to abandon the project entirely. When questioned about these failures, Edison's response revealed the mindset that separates extraordinary achievers from the masses. I have not failed 1,000 times. I have successfully discovered 1,000 ways that will not work. The difference wasn't that Edison felt no disappointment. It was that he recognized fears, disguises, and refused to let them dictate his actions. The conventional wisdom about overcoming fear is fundamentally flawed. Most people have been taught to feel the fear and do it anyway, or to engage in positive affirmations. These approaches not only fail to address the root cause, they often strengthen fear's hold by focusing your attention on the very thing you're trying to overcome. It's like telling someone not to think about a pink elephant immediately. That's all they can see in their mind. What few people understand is that fear operates through predictable patterns that, once recognized, lose their power over you. The majority who fail to achieve their ambitions make the critical mistake of treating fear as an emotion to be conquered rather than a signal to be decoded. They attempt to push through fear with willpower alone, an approach that inevitably leads to exhaustion and surrender. Let me tell you about George, a brilliant engineer I interviewed in Pittsburgh during my research. George had developed a revolutionary manufacturing process that could have made him wealthy beyond imagination. But every time he approached potential investors, an overwhelming sense of inadequacy would emerge. He would find himself overthinking his presentation, adding unnecessary complexities, and ultimately watching as others with inferior ideas secured the funding that could have been his. When I asked George what he believed was holding him back, he cited market conditions, timing issues, and the conservatism of investors. Not once did he mention fear, yet when we explored his thinking processes in depth, the truth emerged. Disguised fear had convinced him he wasn't worthy of success, that he would be exposed as a fraud if his idea received significant attention. This brilliant man had been sabotaged not by external circumstances but by an internal enemy he couldn't even name. Similarly, I encountered Sarah, a talented writer in Chicago whose novel had been praised by everyone who read initial chapters. Yet year after year passed without her completing the manuscript. Her excuses were masterfully crafted. She needed more research, more life experience, more technical skill. The real issue, which she only discovered through our work together, was that finishing the book meant exposing herself to judgment and potential rejection. Her fear had disguised itself as perfectionism. What George and Sarah share with millions of others is that their fear operated in stealth mode, creating elaborate justifications that seemed entirely rational. This is why conventional approaches to fear fail so spectacularly. You cannot overcome an enemy you cannot identify. The majority who remain trapped by fear never realize they're addressing a symptom rather than the cause. They attempt to build confidence before taking action, not understanding that genuine confidence is the result of action, not its prerequisite. They wait for fear to disappear before moving forward, not recognizing that for the most successful people, fear never disappears, it is simply processed differently. The minority who triumph over fear's sabotage understand something essential. Fear in its various disguises is not an obstacle to success, but rather a signpost, pointing toward the precise actions that will lead to your greatest achievements. When properly decoded, fear reveals exactly where your most important growth opportunities lie. The question then becomes not how to eliminate fear, but how to unmask it, understand its hidden message, and transform it from an obstacle into a catalyst for extraordinary achievement. This is the fundamental shift that separates those who merely dream from those who accomplish the seemingly impossible. What I am about to share with you represents the distillation of my most profound discoveries about the human mind and its relationship with fear. This understanding did not come easily. It emerged through thousands of interviews with individuals who had conquered the very fears that paralyzed the average person. These were not people born without fear. They were people who had discovered how to transform fear into an ally rather than allowing it to remain an adversary. The methodology I've developed, which I call the fear transmutation process, stands apart from conventional approaches because it doesn't attempt to eliminate fear, a futile endeavor that has led countless people to frustration and surrender. Instead, this process works with the natural architecture of your mind to reinterpret fear signals, redirect their energy, and reconstruct your relationship with fear itself. During my 17 years of research for Think and Grow Rich, I discovered something remarkable about the world's most accomplished individuals. They experience the same fears as everyone else, but they have developed a fundamentally different relationship with those fears. While the masses interpret fear as a signal to retreat, these extraordinary achievers have learned to interpret it as a signal indicating precisely where they must advance. Let me be clear, this isn't about adopting superficial techniques or reciting empty affirmations. What I'm offering is a complete rewiring of how your mind processes and responds to fear. When properly implemented, this methodology doesn't merely help you push through fear temporarily. It fundamentally alters your perception of what fear means and how it can serve rather than sabotage your ambitions. What makes this approach uniquely powerful is that it addresses fear at its source in the subconscious mind, where it originates and gains its power. While most approaches focus on managing fear's symptoms through conscious effort, an approach doomed to eventual failure, the fear transmutation process works directly with the subconscious patterns that generate fear in the first place. I speak with authority on this matter not because I've read about these principles in books, but because I've personally witnessed their transformative power in the lives of thousands. I've seen timid men and women who could barely speak in public become commanding orators. I've watched failing entrepreneurs apply these principles and build commercial empires. I've observed individuals paralyzed by self-doubt become confident leaders who inspire others. What you're about to discover is knowledge that most people will never encounter. The average person spends their entire life running from shadows they don't understand, never realizing that these very shadows contain the secrets to their liberation, while they seek external solutions to internal problems. Chasing after success without addressing the fundamental fears blocking their path, you will gain insight into the hidden mechanics of your own mind. This path is different from what you've been taught. While conventional wisdom suggests that fear is something to be conquered through force of will, I will show you why this approach inevitably fails. While popular psychology often recommends analyzing your fears through endless introspection, I will reveal why this frequently strengthens rather than weakens fear's grip. The truth is that most people misunderstand fear entirely. They see it as an emotion to be managed when it is actually a sophisticated communication system designed to guide you toward growth. When you learn to decode this system rather than fight against it, fear becomes not your enemy but your most valuable advisor. What awaits you is not merely freedom from fear's paralyzing effects, but the ability to harness fear's immense energy for constructive purposes. Just as electricity, once understood and properly channeled, was transformed from a frightening natural phenomenon into a power that revolutionized human civilization, your fear contains energy that, when properly directed, can fuel achievements beyond your current imagination. You stand at a crossroads. You can continue to let disguised fear dictate the boundaries of your life, or you can embark on the path that every truly successful person has discovered, learning to unmask, understand, and ultimately redirect fear's energy toward the creation of the life you truly desire. The process of unmasking and destroying the fear that sabotages you rests upon several foundational principles. Each of these principles, when fully understood and properly applied, will systematically dismantle fear's hidden influence over your life. Let me share these transformative concepts with you now. The first foundation of fear mastery begins with understanding that fear never appears in its true form. Like a master of disguise, it cloaks itself in rational-sounding justifications that your conscious mind accepts without question. Consider how water assumes the shape of whatever container holds it. Fear operates similarly, molding itself into thought patterns you won't recognize as fear at all. For some, it appears as perfectionism, the need to prepare endlessly before taking action. For others, it manifests as excessive analysis, gathering more information when they already possess enough knowledge to proceed. And for many, it emerges as constant busyness, filling every moment with activity to avoid facing the essential actions that generate true progress. Imagine a skilled counterfeiter who creates currency so convincing that banks accept it without hesitation. Your disguised fear operates with similar precision, creating thoughts that your conscious mind accepts as valid reasoning rather than recognizing them as fear in disguise. Just as a jeweler needs specialized tools to identify counterfeit gems, you need specific techniques to recognize fear's sophisticated disguises. I recall working with a talented physician who had dreamed of opening his own practice for years. Whenever the opportunity arose, he would identify seemingly logical reasons to delay. Market conditions weren't optimal. He needed additional certifications. The location wasn't perfect. When I helped him examine these thoughts more deeply, the truth emerged. Behind each logical reason stood fear, disguised as prudence. Once he recognized this pattern, he established his practice within 3 months and achieved greater success than he had previously thought possible. The transformation began the moment he could distinguish between genuine prudence and fear, masquerading as careful planning. This ability to unmask fear's disguises is not something you're born with. It's a skill that can be developed through specific practices I will share shortly. The second principle reveals that fear derives its power not from its intensity but from its invisibility. Like a foreign agent operating within your mind, fear's greatest strength lies in remaining undetected. When you experience obvious fear, trembling before public speaking, nervous before an important meeting, you at least know what you're facing. Far more dangerous is the fear that operates beneath your awareness, subtly redirecting your thoughts and actions away from your most important objectives. Think of it as similar to an underground river flowing beneath a city. The residents above may never see the water, yet it shapes the entire foundation upon which they build their lives. Your unrecognized fears form this underground river, influencing every decision while remaining invisible to your conscious awareness. The moment you develop the ability to map this underground system, you gain the power to redirect its flow. I worked with a brilliant businessman in Chicago, whose company repeatedly approached significant expansion opportunities only to retreat at critical moments. His leadership team couldn't understand the pattern until we uncovered his hidden fear, not of failure, as one might expect, but of the increased visibility and scrutiny that would come with greater success. This fear operated entirely beneath his awareness, creating plausible business reasons to avoid expansion that his conscious mind accepted without question. Once brought into the light, this fear lost its controlling influence. Within 18 months of our work together, his company doubled in size and profitability. The fear didn't disappear, it was simply unmasked, understood, and redirected. Remember, what remains invisible controls you. What becomes visible comes under your control. The third fundamental principle is that your response to fear is habitual, not instinctive. While the initial fear impulse may arise automatically, your interpretation of and reaction to that impulse is a pattern developed through repetition, not an unchangeable aspect of your character. This distinction is crucial because habits, unlike instincts, can be systematically replaced through deliberate practice. Consider how a skilled pianist doesn't consciously think about each individual finger movement. Through practice, these movements have become automatic, requiring no conscious direction. Your responses to fear have developed similar automaticity. They feel natural not because they are innate, but because they have been practiced thousands of times. This understanding liberates you from the belief that your fear response is fixed. Just as water that has flowed down a hillside in the same pattern for years can be redirected through deliberate landscaping, your habitual fear responses can be rechanneled through systematic practice. The gardener doesn't fight against water's nature. He works with it, creating new pathways for its flow. Similarly, you won't overcome fear by battling against its existence, but by creating new pathways for its expression. I recall working with an accomplished attorney who froze whenever she had to negotiate against certain aggressive personalities. Despite her extensive knowledge and experience, this pattern repeatedly compromised her effectiveness. Through our work together, she recognized that this wasn't an unchangeable aspect of her character, but rather a habitual response that could be redesigned. By implementing specific practices to create a new response pathway, within 3 months she transformed this former weakness into one of her greatest strengths. Today, she specifically requests the cases that involve the very personalities she once avoided. The fourth principle reveals that fear's primary mechanism of control is through attention manipulation. Your mind's focus determines your reality. Whatever captures your attention shapes your perception and ultimately your actions. Fear achieves its controlling influence by hijacking your attention, directing it toward threats real or imagined and away from opportunities and solutions. Imagine your attention as a spotlight on a darkened stage. Whatever falls within that beam becomes your reality in that moment. Everything else might as well not exist. Fear seizes control of that spotlight, directing it exclusively toward possible negative outcomes while keeping positive possibilities shrouded in darkness. This attention hijacking happens so subtly that most people never realize their perception has been manipulated. This explains why two individuals facing identical circumstances can perceive entirely different realities. The person whose attention has been captured by fear sees only threats and limitations, while another sees opportunities and possibilities, not because the external situation differs, but because their attention is directed toward different aspects of the same reality. I worked with two partners who started identical businesses in neighboring cities. One focused relentlessly on potential problems, constantly scanning for what might go wrong. The other maintained awareness of risks, but kept her primary attention on emerging opportunities. Within 3 years, their outcomes diverged dramatically. The opportunity-focused partner built a thriving enterprise, while the problem-focused partner barely survived. The difference wasn't in their circumstances, but in what their attention consistently emphasized. The liberating truth is that while fear's hijacking of attention often happens automatically, you can develop the ability to reclaim control of your spotlight, consciously directing it toward what serves rather than sabotages your aspirations. This doesn't require superhuman willpower, but rather specific techniques that interrupt fear's automatic capturing of attention. What are you beginning to recognize about how fear has operated in your own life? I encourage you to leave a comment sharing which of these principles speaks most directly to your experience. Your insight might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear to begin their own transformation. As these principles settle into your understanding, I can anticipate certain questions arising in your mind. These are the same doubts that have emerged whenever I've shared these concepts with audiences across the nation, and addressing them directly will strengthen your ability to implement what you're learning. You might be thinking, but Napoleon, isn't fear sometimes useful? Doesn't it protect us from genuine dangers? This is a perceptive question that gets to the heart of our misunderstanding about fear's purpose. Yes, Fear, in its original design, serves a protective function, the involuntary response that pulls your hand away from a hot surface or alerts you to physical danger. But this primitive survival mechanism has been hijacked in our modern world, triggering in situations where no physical threat exists. Ask yourself this: when was the last time your fear actually protected you from genuine danger, versus how often it has prevented you from taking beneficial action toward your goals? For most people, fear restricts growth 100 times more often than it prevents harm. The methodology I'm sharing doesn't eliminate fear's protective function. It restores fear to its proper role by distinguishing between genuine warnings and false alarms. Others might object. I've tried to overcome my fears before, and nothing worked. Why would this approach be any different? This doubt reflects the fundamental misunderstanding that has kept millions trapped, the belief that fear should be overcome rather than redirected. Traditional approaches fail because they attempt to eliminate or suppress fear, an approach no more effective than trying to stop a river from flowing. The principles I'm sharing work precisely because they don't fight against fear's existence, but rather channel its energy toward constructive purposes. Consider the difference between a dam that merely blocks water, creating tremendous pressure and eventual breakage, versus a hydroelectric system that harnesses water's power to generate electricity. The latter doesn't eliminate the water, it transforms its energy into a valuable resource. This precisely illustrates the difference between conventional approaches to fear and the methodology I'm presenting. Some of you may be wondering, doesn't this approach require extraordinary willpower or mental discipline that most people don't possess? This concern stems from the misconception that mastering fear requires becoming someone different from who you are. In reality, the approach I'm sharing works with your mind's natural architecture rather than against it. It doesn't demand superhuman strength, but rather strategic understanding. Think of it as similar to martial arts techniques that use an opponent's momentum rather than directly opposing their force. Even a physically smaller person can redirect the energy of a larger opponent, once they understand the principles of leverage and movement. Similarly, you don't need exceptional willpower to redirect fear. You need specific techniques that work with, rather than against, your mind's natural functioning. Perhaps the most significant doubt many harbor is, what if I'm simply not meant for extraordinary achievement? What if some people are naturally more courageous than others? Let me address this directly. In my decades studying human achievement, I have found that courage is never an inborn trait, but always a developed capacity. Every person I've interviewed who achieved remarkable success, from industrialists to inventors, from artists to entrepreneurs, began with the same fears that plague the average person. The difference wasn't in their initial character, but in the mental framework they developed for processing fear. Have you ever noticed how children learn to swim? Initially, water triggers fear in almost every child, yet through proper instruction and graduated exposure, that same child eventually dives confidently into the deep end. The water hasn't changed. The child's relationship with water has transformed. Similarly, the methodology I'm sharing doesn't require you to become someone different. It guides you in developing a new relationship with the fears you already experience. As we continue, I encourage you to notice which of these objections resonates most strongly with your own thinking. Often, the resistance that feels most powerful points directly to the area where your greatest transformation awaits. Now, let us explore how these principles work together as an integrated system rather than isolated concepts. The true power of this methodology emerges not from applying each principle individually, but from understanding their synergistic relationship, how each reinforces and amplifies the others to create a comprehensive framework for fear transmutation. Imagine your mind as a sophisticated power plant. Within this facility, Fear represents raw energy that can either be wasted as dangerous electrical discharges or channeled through proper circuitry to illuminate an entire city. The principles I've shared form the components of this circuitry, each playing a vital role in transforming potentially destructive energy into productive power. The first principle, recognizing fears, disguises functions as the initial detection system, identifying energy sources that would otherwise remain hidden. The second principle, understanding fear's invisible power, creates the necessary containment structures to prevent energy leakage. The third principle, recognizing the habitual nature of your responses, establishes the transformative mechanisms that convert raw energy into usable power. And the fourth principle, reclaiming control of your attention, serves as the distribution system that directs this converted energy precisely where it's needed most. When implemented as an integrated system, these components don't merely manage fear, they transform it into the primary fuel for your achievement. This transformation occurs through a three-stage process that I call the fear alchemy formula. The first stage is recognition, developing heightened awareness of fear's presence in its various disguises. This isn't merely intellectual understanding, but practical recognition in real time as fear emerges in your daily experience. Through specific observation practices I'll shortly describe, you'll develop the ability to identify fear's fingerprints in your thoughts, physical sensations, and behavioral impulses before they fully materialize into limiting actions. The second stage is reframing, interpreting fear signals not as warnings to retreat but as indicators pointing toward your most important growth opportunities. This cognitive restructuring doesn't deny fear's message but reinterprets its meaning, converting danger signals into development signals. Through consistent application of specific mental frameworks, what once triggered avoidance now generates engagement. The third stage is redirection, channeling fear's energy into productive action rather than protective hesitation. This involves specific implementation techniques that convert emotional energy into practical momentum, transforming what was once an obstacle into a catalyst for achievement. Think of how a skilled sailor uses contrary winds to actually propel a boat forward through the strategic positioning of sails. The wind itself hasn't changed, the sailor's relationship to it has transformed through understanding and technique. Similarly, this three-stage process doesn't eliminate fear but establishes a fundamentally different relationship with it, allowing its energy to propel rather than hinder your progress. When these principles and stages work together as an integrated system, something remarkable happens. Fear no longer functions as your adversary, but becomes your most reliable growth advisor, consistently pointing toward precisely those actions that will lead to your greatest development and achievement. The knowledge I've shared with you today represents merely the beginning, the intellectual foundation upon which transformative action must be built. For these principles to generate tangible results in your life, they must move from concepts you understand to practices you implement daily. Your journey toward fear transmutation begins with a decision, not a vague intention to try these ideas, but a definitive commitment to master them. This commitment must be followed by immediate action. For a truth I've observed across thousands of success stories is that the gap between learning and application is where most potential achievement dies. Begin today by conducting what I call a fear inventory, a thorough examination of decisions you've delayed, opportunities you've declined, and actions you've avoided. For each item, ask yourself, what was I protecting by not moving forward? This simple yet profound question will begin to reveal fear's disguises in your specific circumstances, making visible what has remained hidden. Then, select one significant action that fear has been preventing you from taking, not necessarily the largest, but one meaningful enough to matter. Commit to implementing the fear alchemy formula with this specific challenge over the next 7 days. Document your observations throughout this process, noting how fear presents itself, how you reframe its message, and how you redirect its energy. Remember that mastery comes not from perfect implementation but from persistent practice. Each time you apply these principles, their effectiveness increases exponentially as your mind develops new neural pathways for processing fear. The difference between those who merely understand these concepts and those who transform their lives through them lies in consistent application. Will you be among the few who convert knowledge into action, transmuting fear into achievement? Or will you join the majority who glimpse powerful truths but fail to incorporate them into daily practice? The choice and the extraordinary life it can create belongs to you alone. The principles work for anyone with the courage to apply them. Will you begin today?